Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis, and in today's lecture we are going to discuss about major articles that are given in the Hindu newspaper, right? So as part of this discussion, first and foremost, we have one very important article, and this article is with respect to India's urban transformation, right? So this is in the perspective of how India's urban trajectory has been moving forward, right, in recent times. So this is particularly keeping in mind linking the religious aspects with the urban development and what the government has been doing and what the government should do with respect to the urbanization and its large scale development in India. So if you look at the urban areas, it is in the context of recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi had inaugurated the Ram Temple. Okay, so Ayodhya Ram Temple, we all know about that, and also we have constructed the Parliament building as well. So therefore, the recent inauguration of both Parliament building as well as Ram Temple has sparked a large-scale debate with respect to the intersection of politics and religion in urban development. Right, so how intersection of religion and politics has been playing a key role in the urban development, this is what we are going to discuss. Okay, so this is the key issue in this particular article. So the events, particularly the consecration ceremony of Ram Temple in Ayodhya, they have raised several important questions. So the questions in the sense, the role of elected representatives, both as a democratic governance and religious affairs, as well as the future trajectory of urbanization in India. So in this particular article, the author has linked urbanization with the political development as well as the religious affairs that have been taking place under this particular government. Right. So previously, if you look at the urbanization in India as a phenomena, that is actually the legacy of colonial rulers. Okay, so legacy of colonial rulers in the sense that during our colonial times, a very few cities were developed, and those cities still continues to be the centers of urban activity, or centers of economic growth. Okay, so the colonial legacy and new paradigms of urban development, so that we look into it briefly. Now, if you look at the historical trajectory of urban development, how urban development has started taking place in India from colonial times to the present times, it is actually shaped by the colonial legacies. So we can clearly say that the urban development in India is broadly or primarily shaped by the colonial legacies. So with metropolitan cities, for example, we have few metropolitan cities: Kolkata, New Delhi, Hyderabad. So those are known as metropolitan cities, with cities which have more than 10 lakh population. So with metropolitan cities, and these cities have been serving as centers of industrialization as well as the economic activity also. However, one thing that we need to understand, all these cities now considered as metropolitan cities are actually the result of the colonial policies. So secondly, when we talk about the modernism, the modern cities, so there are several modern cities. For example, Chandigarh is a modern city. So these modern cities have been traditionally characterized by the elements of modernism. So when I say elements of modernism, so they have involved modern design. Okay, so they have involved modern design, they have involved innovation, they have involved technology, and they also have certain cultural elements. So all those elements are known as the elements of modernism. So after that, the emergence of new religious cities. So new religious cities, for example, Ayodhya, a new religious city. Okay, so the emergence of these religious cities signals a paradigm shift in the urban development. So there has been a transformative shift in the urban areas, especially with respect to the emergence or rise of these religious cities, where these religious identities takes precedence over the industrialization and modernization. So please understand, during the colonial times, the cities were developed based on the industrialization. Okay, so that is the essence of the first point. And at the same time, even after the colonial times, there are certain cities which are developed based on the modernization. I have told you the elements of modernization. However, now the development of these religious cities, they have been taking precedence over the industrialization and modernization, and this is known as the paradigm shift in the development of these urban areas or urban centers. So proceed further. So investment and random modules in the urban development. See, the post-colonial urbanization, when we talk about the post-colonial urbanization, so in India, so it actually witnessed emergence of industrial towns along with the metropolitan centers, right? However, yet metros continue to attract the largest share of population and investments. Okay, so if you look at the post-colonial urbanization as a phenomena, so this has witnessed the emergence of industrial towns, right? So this has witnessed the emergence of industrial towns along with the metropolitan centers. Yet metropolitan centers, the metropolitan cities, have continued to attract the largest share of population as well as investments. After that, however, there were recent efforts. So these efforts are specifically aimed to elevate the religious pilgrimage. So imagine if there is a city and that particular city has been developed centered around the religious activities, so then that city could elevate regional pilgrimage cities like Ayodhya to the status of colonial cities. Okay, so through substantial infrastructure investments. Okay, after that, investing in regional cities. The government has been investing in regional cities, and it is considered as one of the commendable for promoting production and tourism in those cities. However, the problem is that there's a lack of national strategy, a coherent, a comprehensive, holistic national strategy with respect to the development of these urban centers. So therefore, because there is a lack of coherent national strategy, it has raised concerns about the haphazard expenditure. Okay, so haphazard expenditure that has been taking place with respect to the development of the urban centers. So even if the government has been making investment in these urban centers, so those investments have not been giving gainful results. Okay, so this is considered as haphazard expenditure, and it further leads to the haphazard development of these urban centers. However, the government has been emphasizing on the monumental projects and as well as the religious infrastructure in recent times. For example, if you look at urban areas, the government has already started the programs like Amrut, okay, and Hriday. Okay, so these programs have been essentially emphasizing that the government has making certain specific emphasis on monumental projects as well as the religious infrastructure. Okay, so it has been suggesting a deliberate attempt to merge religion with the politics. So the government has been trying to merge religion with the politics, and it has been signaling a departure from the secular ideals that are being enshrined in the Indian Constitution. So if I can remind you, secularism is part of the basic structure. Even though secular principles are not directly mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, Supreme Court in S.R. Bommai judgment has held that secularism is a basic feature of the Indian Constitution. So however, when the state has been promoting one particular religion, so it is considered as a departure from the secular ideals enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Now, secularism essentially means that equal treatment of all religions. The government will not favor any one particular religion. However, so if you look at the phenomenon that has been taking place, that is religious urbanization, religion-driven urbanization, that has been pointing out towards the secular ideals that are being departure from the secular ideals that are being enshrined in the Indian Constitution, right? So after that, we need to talk about the role of state as well as the social good as well. Now, what exactly is the role of state with respect to the development? And this is what we need to identify. The government should be able to provide the social good for the people instead of engaging in all those activities which may create divisions among the people and the communities. Now, if you look at the role of the state and the larger social good of the state, is that urban development should prioritize the social welfare. Okay, so the urban development should actually prioritize the social welfare. For example, if you are developing the urban centers, so those urban centers should reduce the gender inequalities that were prevalent. Those urban centers would ensure equity for all the people. Those urban centers would be able to develop healthcare as well as education for the people who are living in those areas. Okay, so that should be the overall emphasis of the any government. So therefore urban development should actually prioritize the social welfare and equitable distribution of resources as well. However, addressing this trend actually requires a shift towards the decentralization. So when I say decentralization, the power should not be concentrated at the one single level or at the top level. Therefore, the powers, finances, everything should be decentralized towards the local levels. And after that, there's also a need for greater democratization when it comes to the urban development. So therefore, the author has been emphasizing on addressing this particular trend of the government requires decentralization, democratization, and dynamic coexistence. Okay, so that respects or treats everyone equally, or that respects everyone's rights, and also provides opportunities for all the people who are living in those urban spaces. Okay, when I say social welfare in these urban areas, when I say equitable distribution of existing resources, that could be possible only through the decentralization and the democratization, and also the dynamic coexistence. So that ensures equal rights and opportunities for all the sections in these urban areas. Okay, so that is actually the essence of inclusive growth. Okay, so only through this we can ensure the inclusive growth. And after that, the government should not just promoting the religious exclusivity. Now, I've already told you that promoting religious exclusivity is against the secular principles of the Indian Constitution, and it also creates divisions and disaffection among the citizens in those urban areas. So therefore, the government should not just promoting the religious exclusivity. Rather, when we talk about the comprehensive and holistic urban planning, it should thrive for inclusivity and social cohesion that fosters a diverse and vibrant urban landscapes. Okay, so these urban land spaces should be diverse and vibrant in nature. Now, after that, there are certain priorities that are being underlined by the author in this particular article. So what are those priorities? The priorities are, now India has been facing several problems, or India has been grappling with the challenges such as rapid urbanization. Now, if you look at India's urbanization, there's no doubt that we have seen a rapid urbanization as a phenomenon. Now, rapid urbanization is no problem, but the urbanization is very often is known as unplanned urbanization. So in the case of unplanned urbanization, so that would lead to the poor growth rate, and that could lead to the problems like pollution, and that could even lead to the poor living conditions of the people in those urban centers. So therefore, India has been facing several problems such as rapid urbanization and the existing socio-economic disparities in those urban areas. So therefore, in this context, in the backdrop of these challenges, the role of the state, the role of the government should be promoting social welfare. Now, when I say social welfare, I've already told you that respecting respecting the rights of all the citizens, and at the same time ensuring that the opportunities are received by all the citizens. So therefore, the government should promote social welfare and equitable urban development as well, and it should be considered as paramount duty of the government with respect to urbanization, rather than creating religious divisions in those urban areas. And this is the view of the author in this first point. So how can we achieve that? We can achieve that through decentralization. Okay, we can achieve this through decentralization and at the same time democratization. Okay, democratization. So that is the essence of ensuring the inclusive growth. Okay, inclusive growth. Now, after that, the second priority that is being underlined by the author is that policymaker must prioritize the investments. Okay, so in this present context, urban spaces require greater investments. However, the policy maker must prioritize investments. Those investment should benefit all the citizens. Okay, so they should not be concentrated, they should not be focused for a specific group. Rather, they should benefit all the citizens irrespective of the religious affiliations, and to build a more inclusive and sustainable urban future. So this is actually the overall view of the author with respect to the present urbanization, and he emphasizes on building a more inclusive and sustainable urban future, so that ensures inclusive development and inclusive growth for all in those urban centers, and in return India as a whole. Okay, so this is the view of the author in this particular article. So after that, we will briefly talk about the electoral bonds scheme. Okay, so what exactly is the electoral bond scheme, when it was introduced? And after introducing this, recently Supreme Court has declared the electoral bond as unconstitutional. Okay, because it has been violating several principles of several provisions of the Indian Constitution, and at the same time it has been promoting anonymity and lack of transparency with respect to the electoral bond scheme. The Supreme Court has declared the electoral bonds as unconstitutional. Now, along with declaring electoral bonds as unconstitutional, there was a bank called State Bank of India, and State Bank of India is actually responsible for selling these electoral bonds to the people, right? So State Bank of India has been selling the electoral bonds to the people, and while issuing this judgment that electoral bonds are unconstitutional by the Supreme Court has also ordered the State Bank of India to submit all the details. Okay, so it has asked the State Bank of India to submit all the details as soon as possible. Okay, so however, we will understand that in a very brief way. So SBI, after this particular judgment, sought a time till June 30. Okay, so SBI asked time from the Supreme Court of India till June 30, because the Supreme Court had said that the SBI must submit the details of who purchased the electoral bonds for which political parties must be submitted to the Election Commission of India by March 12. Okay, March 12. So however, here the State Bank of India filed a petition in the Supreme Court and said that we cannot be able to dispatch these details by March 12. So therefore, please give us time to June 30. Okay, so this is what is the issue. And what SBI said here? So SBI said that the bank sought time till June 30 to match the information to ascertain who contributed to which political party. So who contributed to which political party through these electoral bonds, so that will be ascertained by the SBI. Okay, for that particular reason it has sought the time, and at the same time the electoral bonds have been implemented from April 12 2019 to February 15 2014. So in this particular time period these electoral bonds were implemented. However, in response to the SBI's petition, the Supreme Court has said that SBS should disclose to Election Commission details of electoral bonds by March 12. Okay, the EC must publish the information received from SBI by March 15. So once the Election Commission of India receives the electoral bonds information, then the Election Commission of India will publish the very same electoral bond information to public by March 15, and this is what the Supreme Court has said. Okay, so as requested by the Supreme Court, the SBI has submitted the basic details of electoral bonds to the Election Commission of India. So the Supreme Court judge D.Y. Chandrachud, Chief Justice of India, he also said that we ask you to disclose, do a plain disclosure, and we did not tell you to match the details. You simply need to comply with our February 15 judgment. So this judgment was given by the Supreme Court in February 15, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice has said that make a plain disclosure of electoral bonds to the Election Commission of India, as we have said in 15 February judgment. So therefore, in compliance with the Supreme Court's judgment, State Bank of India has provided the details of these electoral bonds to the Election Commission. Okay, so SBI submits data on electoral bonds to the Election Commission, and this is brief background. Now we will try and understand what are electoral bonds in a very brief manner. Now what are those electoral bonds? So electoral bonds, actually the money instruments like the promissory notes or P notes. Okay, promissory notes or P notes. So they can be bought by the companies or individuals in India from the State Bank of India. For example, the bond that you are seeing here is the electoral bond. So this particular electoral bond is also known as a promissory note, and this particular bond can be purchased by any individual or any company in India from the State Bank of India. So State Bank of India is only authorized bank to sell these electoral bonds. Okay, so once you purchase, for example, this particular individual, he purchased this electoral bond from the State Bank of India, and once he purchased this electoral bond from the State Bank of India, then he'll be given this bond, and he should donate this particular bond with the respective political party. Okay, so after that, the political party will submit this bond to the political party will submit this bond to the bank, and in return bank will encash the account of these political parties, and this is actually the process. Okay, so and donate it to a political party, and which can encash these bonds later. So the bonds are only redeemable in the designated account of a registered political party. Okay, so only a registered political party can be able to receive these electoral bonds, not all recognized political parties. Okay, and on the other hand, a person being an individual can buy these bonds either singly or jointly with other individuals as well, and this is about the electoral bonds. Now after that, the electoral bond scheme was inaugurated in 2018. Okay, so in 2018, the then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has introduced this electoral bond scheme, and the overall objective of this particular electoral bond scheme is to cleanse the political funding in India. Okay, so essentially prevent black money entering into the accounts of these political parties. So therefore, in order to cleanse the political funding, the government has introduced the electoral bond scheme in the year 2018. So there's a central idea for introducing this particular electoral bonds. So the central idea is that the scheme was to bring transparency in electoral funding in India. So the overall objective is to bring transparency in the electoral funding in India. So after that, the government has described the scheme as an electoral reform in the country. Why? Because so this particular electoral bond scheme has been introduced to bring transparency in the electoral funding, and because of this reason, the government has said that the government has described the scheme as electoral reform. And it has also said that the country has been moving towards a cashless digital economy, so therefore there is a need for such a electoral reform. So on the right, you can see the chronology of events that have happened with respect to the electoral bond case or electoral bonds. So as I have already told you, electoral bond scheme was introduced in the finance bill. Okay, so ultimately it came into force in the year 2018. So in 2017 September, there was an NGO called Association for Democratic Reforms. So it was a lead petitioner, and that moves to Supreme Court challenging the electoral bond scheme. Okay, in the year 2017. The Supreme Court issues notices to the Centre and Election Commission on the public interest litigation that is being filed by the Association for Democratic Reforms, and that has happened in the year 2017. So in the year 2018, the central government notifies the electoral bond scheme. Okay, so finally the electoral bond scheme was notified by the central government in the year 2018. So 2022, the electoral bond scheme amended to increase sale days from 70 days to 85 in a year where any assembly election may be scheduled. So see, this essentially means that these electoral bonds will not be sold throughout the year. these electoral bonds will not be sold for every day. Rather, only for 70 days these electoral bonds will be sold in the State Bank of India. So however, so there was a provision that if there are the elections, state legislative assembly elections taking place, then the period, the days of selling these electoral bonds can be increased from 70 days to 85 days. Okay, so that was notified by the government in the year 2022 November 7. So after that, in 2023, Supreme Court bench headed by Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, so it refers pleas against scheme to 5-judge constitution bench. So after that, the electoral bond scheme, since it has involved substantial amount of law and the constitutionality, it has been transferred to the constitution bench in the year 2023. So in 2023 October 31st, a 5-judge constitution bench headed by Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud commences hearing on pleas against this particular scheme. So please remember, Association for Democratic Reforms, and that has filed this particular public interest litigation. So by 2023 November 2, Supreme Court completes hearing, and it also reserves the verdict. It also reserves the judgment. And in 2024 February 15, Supreme Court ultimately delivers an anonymous judgment outlining or annulling the scheme, calling it unconstitutional. So in 2024 February 15, the Supreme Court has declared that electoral bond scheme is unconstitutional. Okay, so this particular scheme is unconstitutional, and at the same time, since SBI is the bank which sells these electoral bonds, it has also asked the State Bank of India to submit details to the Election Commission by March 12. Okay, so March 12. So in compliance with the Supreme Court judgment, the SBI has also submitted the details to the Election Commission. Initially, it sought some time to submit these details. Okay, so how an electoral bond works, we will understand this very briefly. So notified banks are chosen. For example, in this case, State Bank of India is a notified bank. So the notified bank then issues these electoral bonds. So I've already told you that SBI will issue these electoral bonds, and individual companies can purchase these electoral bonds. A donor buys an electoral bond using check or digital payment. He is not allowed to purchase an electoral bond with money, because please remember, the government described this particular electoral bond scheme as a election reform towards the cashless economy, and to prevent the entering of black money into the political party funds. So the donor can buy the electoral bonds using either check or digital payment, and then once the donor purchases these electoral bonds, he can donate this particular bonds to the party of his or her choice, and the bond within specified time frame should be submitted to the political party. Then the party deposits the bond in an account, the details which are with the Election Commission of India. Okay, so this is how the how electoral bond usually works. Now we will try and understand briefly why electoral bonds have faced a lot of criticism in recent times. First and foremost, it has been promoting anonymity. Now anonymity in the sense that only government, SBI will know about the donors and to which political party they are actually donating. So therefore it has been maintaining anonymity on the part of the electoral bond scheme. So there are several critics who are arguing that the anonymity of electoral bonds is only for the broader public and opposition parties. So the government will know about who have been contributing to which political party. So therefore there are chances of political victimization. Political victimization may happen with respect to these political parties. So after that, the selling bonds via government owned bank. So SBI is a government owned bank. So these bonds will be sold through the State Bank of India. So therefore it also leaves the door open for the government to know exactly who is funding its opponents. So therefore the government may start this political victimization of individuals or companies which have been funding these opponents or opposition political parties. So after that, the privacy issue. the privacy of donor is compromised as the bank will know their identity. Okay, so in Puttaswamy judgment, Supreme Court has ruled out that Article 21 also includes right to privacy. So therefore the electoral bond scheme also violating the privacy of the donors, because State Bank of India will know about the identity of their donors, because digital payment is being done, or the payment is being done through the checks. After that there will be a nexus. So when I say nexus, the electoral bonds open up another route to further the unholy nexus between the politicians as well as the corporate houses. So this particular unholy nexus will not be good for the country in the longer term. So after that, higher denominations that are being received by these political parties. Now if you look at the total donations, around 90% of donations to these political parties are above 1 crore, and at the same time there's also no limit on the funds which you can give to a political party, and that's where the electoral bond scheme is being criticized. And after that, cap on donation. Now cap on donation in the sense that before the electoral bond scheme was introduced, there was another alternative method of funding the political parties. Okay, so it was announced and there was a cap on how much a company could donate to a political party. So earlier it was around 7.5% of their average net profits, and that could be funded to the political parties. However, this particular electoral bond scheme has lifted the limit on the funding. Okay, so that is also a concern. So however, there are a number of committees. Those committees have recommended that state funding of political parties. Okay, state funding of political parties. So this is one of the important electoral reform that should be considered. Okay, state funding of political parties. So after that, why Supreme Court has struck down this particular electoral bond scheme as unconstitutional? Because the Supreme Court says that it has been violating right to information. Please remember, RTI, right to information, is included in the Article 19 clause 1 and subclause E. Okay, so the Supreme Court has said that the electoral bond scheme is violating right to information of individual under Article 19(1) and clause E. So, and at the same time, the amendments to the Companies Act are also considered as unconstitutional. Okay, because now the government has made amendments to the Companies Act, and that sets there will be no limits on the political funding to these political parties. So therefore the Supreme Court has also declared these amendments as unconstitutional. So after that, amendments are also being made to the Income Tax Act and Section 29C of the Representation of People Act. So they are also being declared as unconstitutional or ultra vires by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has also directed the State Bank of India, so that is the bank which sells these electoral bonds, to furnish the details of electoral bonds encashed by these political parties to Election Commission of India by March 12. So initially the State Bank of India has sought some time till June. However, the Supreme Court has denied to provide the extension in time to provide these details to the Election Commission of India. So as per the Supreme Court guidelines, the SBI has provided details to the Election Commission of India. Okay. Now this is all about the electoral bond scheme, and the next very important article is with respect to India and Myanmar issue. Sorry, India and Maldives issue. So if you regularly follow news, India and Myanmar have been facing a diplomatic conflict. Okay, why diplomatic conflict? Because in Maldives, so there was a anti-India government under Mohammed Moiju. Okay, Mohammed Moiju government has been adopting the anti-India stance, and this has started particularly with the India Out campaign. Okay, so India Out campaign that was run by these opposition parties before, and after that, when Mohammed Moiju's government came to power in Maldives, Prime Minister Narendra Modi paid a visit to Lakshadweeps. Okay, so you can see on the map, Prime Minister Narendra Modi paid an official visit to Lakshadweep, and in this particular official visit to Lakshadweep, some of the ministers of this new government from Maldives have made the derogatory remarks on our Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So that has led to the diplomatic row, and in fact Maldives had said India to withdraw the troops which India has stationed in Maldives, especially for the purpose of relief, rescue and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Now in this context we will understand the recent developments. Okay, so India started pulling out its troops from the Maldives. So as asked by the Maldivian government to withdraw all Indian troops, India has started pulling out its troops from the Maldives, because now Mohammad Moiju is considered as anti-India and pro-China president. Okay, so he is Mohammad Moiju, and he has ordered to leave the archipelago by May 10, and the local media has reported this. Okay, so the present anti-India and pro-China president Mohammad Moiju government has asked India to withdraw all its troops from the archipelago by May 10. So now as many as 25 Indian military personnel are so far deployed in the southern atoll of Addu. Okay, so Addu is located somewhere here in Maldives. So 25 Indian military personnel are so far deployed in the southernmost atoll called Addu. So they left the nation ahead of March 10, and the official start of withdrawal of the troops from Maldives agreed by both India and Maldives. Okay, so India also agreed to pull out troops from Maldives. Okay, so following talks between Malé and New Delhi, the two sides, both India and Maldives, have agreed to completely withdraw all 89 Indian troops and their support staff from the nation by the May 10. Okay, so it will be done in a phased manner, and sudden pull out of all the troops would not be feasible or possible. Okay, so 3 Indian aircraft. So the aircraft, 2 helicopters and 1 fixed wing plane. So these 2 Indian aircraft are actually operated by Indian civilian staff, had already arrived in the island nation. Okay, so 2 helicopters and 1 fixed wing plane are now operated by the civilians, because the government has ordered to withdraw the military personnel from Maldives. Okay, so now after that, a high level meeting that took place in February 2 between India and Maldives. So in this particular high level meeting, there was no official confirmation from either of Maldivian side or to the Indian side, Indian authorities, with respect to what should be the outcome of this particular meeting. However, the media has reported that the Maldivian National Defense Force confirmed the withdrawal of Indian troops. Okay, so the withdrawal of Indian troops had commenced, and this is what has been held by Maldivian National Defense Force. So after coming to power last year, Moiju had pledged that no Indian security personnel deployed in Maldives to patrol its vast maritime border will be allowed. So this is what the government of Mohammad Moiju has clearly said. So it has clearly said that after coming to power, so they have said that when they were in opposition, Moiju had pledged that no Indian security personnel would be deployed in Maldives. Okay, so no Indian security personnel would be deployed in Maldives to patrol its vast maritime border. So that will be allowed. So it will not be allowed. So on March 4, Maldives in fact signed an agreement with China. Okay, so as the deadline for the Indian troop pullout has approached, so they have signed one particular agreement after the pullout of Indian troops from the Maldives. So the Maldivian Defense Ministry said that the deal was to foster stronger bilateral ties with China, and that China would train its staff under the same. So it essentially means that China would train its staff, the Maldivian National Defense Forces, under this particular pact after the pulling out of Indian troops from Maldives. Okay, So, in fact, Mohammad Moiju had reportedly said that no Indian troops, not even those with the civilian clothes, would be allowed to enter the archipelago after May 10. So they will not be allowed to enter the archipelago. So this is a strong threat that is being given to India with respect to by Maldivian government. Okay, so his comments came after an Indian civilian team reached to the Maldives. So as I have already told you that in order to make sure that the pullout of troops takes place in a smoother way, the government of India sent the civilians to operate 2 helicopters and 1 civilian aircraft. Okay. So Mohammad Moiju said that no Indian troops, even civilians, would not be allowed to enter the archipelago after May 10. So his comments actually came after an Indian civilian team reached Maldives to take charge of one of 3 aviation platforms in the island nation, and that is being given by India. Okay, so this particular development comes amid a diplomatic row between India and Maldives over Maldivian politicians making derogatory remarks against Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Lakshadweep, and this is what we have already discussed. Okay, Maldivian ministers have made derogatory remarks against our Prime Minister Narendra Modi in January, so which has strained the relations between both these countries. Okay, so this is all about the withdrawal or pulling out of troops by India from Maldives. So the next, after that, the last month, India said that it was bolstering its naval forces on its strategically important Lakshadweep Island. Okay, so Lakshadweep Island is just located above the Maldives. So therefore, Indian Navy has said that it has been bolstering its naval forces or naval capacities in strategically important Lakshadweep Island, about 130 kilometers north of Maldives. Okay, so the Indian Navy said that its unit on the island of Minicoy would boost operational surveillance in the region. Okay, so it would boost the operational surveillance in the region, and this is what Indian Navy has said with respect to Lakshadweep. See, now in this case, since Maldives had adopted the anti-India stance and that allowed the Chinese ships to enter the Indian Ocean, so therefore in this context, in order to make sure the operation, we have robust operational surveillance with respect to these ships. So the Indian government has been planning, or Indian Navy has been planning, to develop this strategically important Lakshadweep Island. Okay, so that's all about this particular news article. And next, we will briefly also discuss about the next very important topic. Okay, so that topic is actually okay, so it's not responding, and thank you.